Programming is something lots of people enjoy doing. In addition to being entertaining, it can also make for a lucrative and engaging career. People working in high tech find themselves in the enviable position of being able to choose work that's interesting rather than just something that pays the bills. But what about the people who are interested in doing it and haven't gotten there yet? How do they go about breaking into the big high tech companies? My name is John L. Miller and I'm the Deliberate Engineer. I spent 30 years of my life working at various high-tech companies like Microsoft, Google, Amazon, Oracle, and a startup called ThoughtSpot. Over those years, I worked in a variety of roles ranging from a programmer to a manager of programmers to a manager of managers. Along the way, I also did a lot of interviewing for those companies. Sometimes as an engineer doing a technical interview on the loop, sometimes as the hiring manager for that loop who had a vested interest in the person being hired, and sometimes as an as appropriate or as a sort of bar raiser for the interview loop, which means you're the person who's responsible for making sure the interview loop doesn't go awry and that it gets good results. The first thing you should know as somebody who's not already working at a big high-tech company is that it can look like the odds are really stacked against you. When I was working at Google, the percentage of successfully hired candidates that I saw was about 0.5% versus the number of applicants they had. In addition, Microsoft, the 1 year that I had information on that, there were about 250,000 applicants for 5,000 positions. So again, you're looking at like a 2% success rate. Even being picked to interview takes a lot of talent to begin with and a lot of relevant experience or something that will indicate to the company that's hiring that you would be a likely person to succeed if they choose to interview you. So as a basic prerequisite to get a programming job at one of these big high-tech companies, you need to make sure that you're a good programmer, you've got solid technical skills, a lot of knowledge about the area, good communication skills, especially technical communication skills, and finally, something that's often overlooked by candidates, you need to demonstrate an interest and knowledge about that company. They're not going to hire you just because you pass some sort of test. They want to hire people who want to be at that company. Even if you have all of these prerequisites, it doesn't guarantee that you're going to get a job. In fact, it doesn't even guarantee you're going to get an interview. In my experience, getting the interview is the hardest part, not actually passing the interview. After I graduated from undergraduate school, I had no intentions of going any further in university. I wanted to get a job and start working in my career. I sent out resumes and cover letters tailored to a bunch of different companies, probably on the order of 50 or 75 of them, and I got 0 invitations to interview back. In fact, only about 1/5 of the companies that I sent my letters to even bothered responding, sometimes months after the fact. Getting no responses was demoralizing, and fortunately I had a backup plan in case I couldn't find the sort of job that I wanted. That was namely to go to graduate school. It worked out well, surprisingly well. Why wouldn't any of the companies talk to me? I've been working in high tech now for 30 years. Clearly I had the ability to do a good job, but I couldn't demonstrate that to anybody. The reasons are actually pretty simple if you take a look at it from the company's perspective. The company is interested in hiring people who are going to make them money. It takes time to interview every person that they talk to. They only have a certain number of people doing interviews. They only have a certain amount of time they can dedicate it to it. Interviewing is also very expensive for a company. The last figures I saw about 10 years ago said that it was between $30,000 and $50,000 of cost for each person hired. That's $50,000 the company is out before that person ever does a lick of work for them. And they can still be a mishire, there can still be problems. If the person is a mishire, somebody who is hired but can't do a good job at the company, then the price becomes much higher. So what you have is somebody taking up a slot at the company who's requiring extra time to manage and see how they're doing and try and help them improve, requires other departments to get involved, such as HR, and it can be disproportionately distracting for a manager. For example, for me as a manager, when I had, say, 10 people, I would spend anywhere from 1/4 to half of my time on the single most problematic person, trying to make sure that they had enough support, trying to make sure that they were getting feedback about what they should improve, doing the things that I had to do in my role as their manager at the company. The cost of making a mishire is very high. The cost of even finding a good candidate is also high. So companies do everything they can to try and make sure that each person that they interview is going to be successful. The first step, since they have a huge number of applicants, is to apply filtering. In other words, things which say a person must match these attributes to be considered further for the interview. Sometimes these filters are automatic. Sometimes they're a person who's spending very little time for resume. This is one of the reasons why you hear so frequently that you need to make sure, above all else, your resume is very readable, it's very clear, and it uses the right terminology and keywords for somebody who is scanning it. From the company's perspective, there's three primary sources of good candidates. The first and best source of candidates for a company is personal recommendations from people who are already employed at the company in a similar role. For example, one of the first questions that a software engineer who gets hired into a big company like Microsoft or Facebook gets asked is, who can you recommend to come and work for us? The reason the company asks this is simple. It's the most effective way for them to find good people. The person they're asking for referrals already knows what it takes to succeed at the company because they're succeeding at the company. They already passed the interview process, they're working. So they have a realistic idea about what it takes to get hired there. The same sort of person will tend to know other people of about the same quality level, or at least be able to assess the people that they'd worked with and that they'd been at school with and they knew from other avenues. So asking one of these people and getting a recommendation from them, the person is at least likely to have the raw technical skills it takes to succeed at the company. The next set of people that the big tech companies like to hire are people who are already in a known good pool of applicants. For example, people who are working at the other big tech companies, people who are going to universities that good people have already been hired by this company from. This is the reason why the companies go and visit certain universities. They've already successfully hired people from those universities, and they're happy with the rate of success in terms of hiring versus the number of people interviewed at those schools. So they tend to go back year after year. This is something called campus recruiting, which we'll talk about in a little bit. A related source of candidates is people in university who have done internships. From the company's perspective, an internship is like a really, really long interview. They make a commitment to keep that person on for a month or two, but they get to see how that person performs, and they can make a much more informed decision about whether or not to offer them a job. Now, if someone's been offered a job because of doing an internship, that puts them in the same sort of category as somebody who's already working for one of the big high-tech companies. Another source of good candidates is job fairs. Not because there's anything magical about job fairs, but because the job fair allows there to be some good technical screening people in a booth talking face-to-face with folks who are attending. So if you go to a job fair, make sure that you talk to someone face-to-face. Get them to understand how good you are, what you can do for the company. This in turn will greatly increase your chances of being interviewed. The final way, which is very rare, but it's probably worth mentioning, is to be hired into one of the big tech companies through acquisition. Let's say that you're working at a mom and pop computer store or some very specialized startup that's working on a particular technology. It's not uncommon for these companies to be acquired by a big tech company. The big tech company looks at the technology being produced by the company. They might be interested in the customer base of that startup, they might be interested in the technology, but most likely they're interested in the actual people working there. Hiring the people working at a good startup is a great way for a company to bootstrap its efforts in a particular domain or area. This is one of the reasons why they do acquisitions. One thing missing from this list is doing cold calls and sending in lots of resumes. Companies, generally speaking, do not prefer to look at these because, on average, the quality of the applicant is very poor. Lots of times people are shotgunning out tens, hundreds, thousands of resumes. How much effort do you think they put into deciding which company to apply to? So if you're going to take this approach, you want to take steps to make sure that your resume is going to be very easily readable. Show that you spent some time looking at the job description and tailoring your resume to match. So if you're not working at a big tech company already, but you want to, this probably all sounds very discouraging. And to a certain extent, it should sound discouraging. But there's still things that you can do to try and get a job at one of these big companies. The first step, focus on getting that interview. So take a look at your friends, your colleagues, people you went to school with, people who are family friends. If any of them work at any of these companies that you want to work at, that is your very best avenue to get hired by that company, or at least to get interviewed. If they know you well enough, if they know your technical skills well enough to make a recommendation, then they can do what's called a referral for you. That's where they pass along your resume, and they also internally fill out a small form that says how familiar they are with the work you've done, how good they think you are, what percentile, for example, they think you are, and all the programmers they know, and whether they think you'll be successful at the company. This is something that somebody has to know you to be able to do. Lots of times, if you're working in a big tech company, you get asked to refer people. If it's not somebody you know, the first thing that happens is you bring in the resume and you're filling out the form saying how well you know them, and the recruiter will take a look and say, oh, so you haven't actually worked with this person. I'm like, well, no, but the person who told me about him is smart, so I'm sure it'll be good. That application gets marked as a lead rather than a referral. And that really drops it down in the ranking of possibilities to be hired by the company or even interviewed. So the recruiter will still take a look at it. They might even get back to the person who gave them that lead. But in terms of giving you a better chance of getting interviewed, it really doesn't do much. So work through people who actually know you and know what you can do, and get them to refer you inside the company. Now let's say that you can't get a referral and you also don't have any job fairs that are close enough to you to be able to go to and talk to somebody face to face. If you're young enough or if you're early enough in your career, the very best thing you can do is go to university. First, take a look at the universities and see what companies come and visit them for campus recruiting. The whole point of going to a university for big tech is to have an avenue to getting a job that you will want. You can learn lots of good things in university, but there's nothing that keeps you from learning those things on your own. In fact, for people like me, I was a pretty strong programmer before I ever went to university. I'd mentioned that I went to undergraduate school, sent out lots of resumes, and nobody would hire me. When I went to graduate school, I happened to get accepted at UIUC, which is a pretty good computer science school, and it was visited by lots of high-tech companies. The campus recruiting office would tell us when companies like Microsoft were coming to visit, and you could sign up for an interview. That interview was typically pretty short, on the order of 30 minutes, but it gave you face time with somebody who could evaluate you and evaluate your skills as a programmer. Based on that, I got flown out to Seattle, I got interviewed, and I got my first job in big tech. Campus recruiting gave me a foot in the door where it had already been demonstrated to me they wouldn't even consider talking to me earlier. Nothing had changed in my skills. All that changed was I got to talk to a live human being who asked me a programming question, and they said, yeah, good enough to try interviewing them further. What you should take from this is that a great way to get into these big high-tech companies is to go to a university that they recruit from. Make absolutely sure you keep in touch with the career resources team and that you see what companies are going to come and visit. You want to make sure you sign up in time for their interviews with those companies. And I'd say for all the big tech companies, it's probably worth getting interviews for them. In addition to keeping an eye on which companies are coming to visit, you should also apply for every internship or co-op that comes up with a big high-tech company. The reason for this is simple. Like I said earlier, this is really an extended interview process. It can be a little easier to get an internship than it is to get a full-time job, and then you get that experience and make contacts that can help you later on in your career, and ideally that can get you that first foot in the door in that first job. Let's say that you don't have any of these avenues open to you. You're either too old or too far along in your career, or you can't afford to go to university. You don't know anybody who works at the big tech companies, but you still have the dream to work there. The best thing you can do in that case is to build up your technical skills and try and get demonstrable use of those skills. For example, contributing to open source projects or doing other things where it's very clear what your contribution is and the quality of the work that you're producing. Keep an eye on the job openings for these different companies. It's not impossible to get hired through a want ad or submitting your resume. It's just difficult. As you see ones that are interesting to you, apply to them. Make sure that you tailor your cover letter and your resume to match the requirements of that. Don't exclude yourself from a position that you don't meet 100% of the requirements for. Generally speaking, if you meet at least 50% of the requirements, that'll probably put you in a category where you're interesting enough that somebody might take a look at your resume. Once you've gotten an interview with one of these big high-tech companies, then you need to do the right things to be able to pass that interview. I have other videos that explain how to do that. I'll link them in the description below. There's a lot more to say about interviewing, but I've already had this go on for quite a while. This is as good a time as any to stop. If you liked the video or found it useful, please give it a like or a thumbs up. If you would be interested in other content of this type, a fair amount of what I produce on this channel is going to be about interviewing, getting a job, and maintaining your career in big high-tech companies. So please subscribe. Finally, if you have any comments or experience that confirms what I've said or that differs from it, if you have strong opinions or questions, please leave those in the comments. I read the comments. When I can, I respond to the comments. So go ahead and tell me what you think. Thanks, and keep on pushing forward.